Well, breaking news as we record this on Tuesday, December 8th, the state of Texas has brought suit before the Supreme Court regarding the 2020 election and the numerous irregularities. And I think this is the most interesting and potentially promising news since this entire debacle began well over a month ago. Hi, everybody. I'm Bill Whittle here with Steve Green and Scott Otten. This is your right angle on the state of Texas. Saving the country or what's left of it, potentially, who knows? Obviously, things are still very early. We don't know how the court case is going to go. But Steve, we'll start with you. The reason that I was so impressed by this and pleased to see it is because the evidence in at least 4 states, and really probably 6, is in some cases just simply overwhelming. And not just statistically overwhelming, statistically impossible, but there are hundreds of sworn affidavits, and they get more and more of them every day. They've got one of the Dominion voting machines are being looked at forensically and so on. And so far, the Trump legal team has been taking this one state at a time, and therefore they're limited to what they see in one state and can only deal with those particular irregularities. But the reason I like this story so much, Steve, is because Texas is claiming that the entire election was fraudulent in these 5 states, and it seems to me that's going to allow them to bring in the very best of evidence from all across the country, which, if it is presented correctly, and rumor has it that Ted Cruz would be arguing that case, which is more good news, in my opinion, is utterly overwhelming. What say you about that?
Yeah, there's a great crowdsource site. I don't know if you've seen it, called HereIsTheEvidence.com.
It's incredible.
And this went up, 48 hours after the election, something like that? I can't remember who put it together.
It takes about 20 seconds to download all of the data now. Yeah,
it's a huge amount of data. So to our viewers, go to HereIsTheEvidence.com. I don't want to bore you with the statistics or any of that stuff. You're either familiar with it already and you don't need me telling you, or I should just direct you to HereIsTheEvidence.com because, man, it's all there. And it's the real deal. It's an invaluable tool. Here is why I've been filled with doom. Now, my attitude is I'm not conceding defeat until Trump concedes defeat. Period. Just not doing it. I'm in the fight every day until that happens. That said, we have a very funky system. Federalism is, I think, a source of great strength of this country, but it also leads to certain weaknesses because everything is a trade-off. And one of those things is the limited number of resources and the limited amount of time you have to try and prove a stolen presidential election. And what really got me is when you have a county, say one that contains the city of Atlanta, or one that contains the city of Philadelphia, or one that contains the city of Detroit, that is run entirely by Democrats. How do you get in there to fix what's broken? How do you get in there to stop the steal? How do you get in there? And I'm not even just talking about this one election. We've known this corruption has been going on for a very long time. It's been a decades-long running joke about Chicago, and we've seen it elsewhere too. Districts in urban Philly that report greater than 100% turnout. I mean, there you go. There's your fraud. And that's been going on for decades already. So we know what's going on. But how do you get in as a Republican, a conservative, as an independent, into these Democratic strongholds where the attitude isn't just Sergeant Schultz? They're actually stooling for the guards. They're covering for the thieves. And whatever expression you want to use is what they're doing. It's like a wall. But we can't have a situation where a handful of cities are allowed to pick the president of the United States for the entire country when they're doing so through illegal, illicit means. We can't allow this to happen on the one hand. On the other hand, how do you get in there and fix it when there is a one-party rule that will brook no honest investigations? Well, damn it, if Texas didn't figure out how you do it. The state of Texas is an injured party if their vote doesn't count, if their electoral college votes don't count because of thievery in Atlanta, thievery in Philly, thievery in Detroit. And so here we go. This is how you get the federal government involved in this in a way that might matter. Can they do it? I don't know. Can they do it in time? I don't know. But I do know that it had to be done. I couldn't imagine how it could be done. And there's Texas going and doing it.
It's a perfect segue. Scott, you live in Texas, and the genius of the Texas suit is so obvious that I didn't see it before. Sometimes things are so dead in front of your nose you can't make them out. But basically, what Texas is arguing is we're not saying that we had fraudulent election results. We're saying that the election results in Georgia and I want to say Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, if I remember correctly in the suit, those were fraudulent, and they affect us because this is a national election for the president of the United States, and that's going to affect us. That is a profoundly good argument, and I would very much like to see every other Republican-controlled state in the union join this lawsuit. But do you think that that this is going to get to the Supreme Court? Do you think that they're going to hear it? We are now, as we record this, less than a week away from the time specified by the Constitution as the first Wednesday after the first Wednesday after the second Tuesday of December is when the electors must meet. That's December 14th. Do you think this thing is going to get to the Supreme Court? I certainly know that most people who feel that this was stolen have pinned their hopes on it getting to the Supreme Court.
I mean, I think based on the argument that Steve was making, they have a reasonable case to make to get the court to listen to them in the sense that they have standing as a participant in this overall process of the Electoral College. And so Texas, what happens in Georgia and Pennsylvania and Wisconsin and Michigan certainly has an impact on the effect of votes cast in Texas. It would seem to me, a non-legal scholar, that that's a reasonable case to make to say we should at least be able to make our case. And I kind of hope the Supreme Court does, despite my reluctance to have so many major issues in this country being so-called ultimately decided, although that's not true under our Constitution, by the Supreme Court. I don't like the idea that as Republicans, the hopes are pinned upon the court to make the decision that for some reason the people couldn't make from state to state. On the other hand, there are extraordinary circumstances, and I think with literally tens of millions of Americans still questioning the outcome of the election, it behooves the country and perhaps the court to let this play out at the highest bar of justice in the land so that essentially they can say, look, we want the president's team, which, Ken Paxton as the Attorney General of Texas is clearly on the president's team. We want them to make their best case in open court so that the arguments can be heard and so that nobody, after whatever the Supreme Court decides to do, can sit back and say, well, we just never got a shot at making that argument. That's been my complaint all along in the legal process because the stuff that we're seeing online and the things that you've said, Bill, are, alarming statements that are being made by people online that somehow never spill out of the lips of the president's representatives in a court of law. And so this is an opportunity, perhaps the last opportunity, for somebody to stand up and say, this is the best case why we believe that this election, at least in these particular states that matter so much, needs to be reversed, nullified, overturned, rerun, whatever they want to do with it. So I think there's a need on a public communication level for the best minds in the country to come together on this case. And I wonder, and I don't know the answer to this, whether people on either side would accept a fair fight before the Supreme Court and say, well, the court has decided, and therefore we lay down our weapons and accept the results.
I don't care whether they accept it or not. I care about whether or not the law is enforced in this country. And if it goes to the Supreme Court, I think there's at least a chance that there will be some sense of potential justice. And here's why. If this election fraud occurred, and I am utterly convinced that it did, not only because I've seen the evidence, but because I've seen the rebuttals to the evidence. And I know how to look at an argument, and I know how to just deconstruct arguments, and some of the claims made by the people claiming fraud just simply weren't true. But many of them are. And the rebuttals to these claims do not hold water. That's an important aspect of why I'm so convinced about this. But the problem with doing it state by state is simply this. If you are dealing with people that are willing to allow this kind of corruption to happen in the first place, then trying a court in that state is likely to get you the same results. Everybody involved in that legal process in terms of let's just take the Secretary of State as an example. The Secretary of State for the individual states. If the Secretary of State for the individual states is part of this corruption, then you wouldn't expect that you would get a particularly fair trial in places where your entire legal system is what is being, in fact, challenged. That's exactly what's going on here. That's why I have a much better feeling about Texas doing this. And it's not even a question of where there's smoke, there's fire. It's not that at all. I've said it before and I'll say it again. And I'll continue to say this. If God had counted the votes and Joe Biden had won this election legitimately by one single popular vote, not electoral vote, popular vote, I wouldn't like it, but I would accept it. I'm speaking for many tens of millions of Americans who feel the same way. But I am not going to simply sit here and allow this to happen, because if this happens now without this ongoing fight, then we will never have another election again, ever. If they can pull this off, they can pull it off again forever. The evidence, in my opinion, is overwhelming. And when I was in debate, not only did I learn that there's mountains of evidence on either side, and you have to look at the evidence, you have to look at the refutation, but in debate, when you would make a case or rebut somebody else's arguments, we used to do things called flowcharts. We would list all of the arguments that we made, we'd list the rebuttals that they made, and anytime they didn't rebut a specific point, we said, you can give that one to us since they didn't even answer it. And there's been more of that with this than anything I've ever seen. I say God bless Texas, and I don't know why other states didn't do it earlier, and I wish they would too. This election is not about Georgia. It's not about Pennsylvania or Michigan or Wisconsin or Arizona, Nevada, none of it. It's about the United States of America and the future of this country to have free and fair elections. And this process has been absolutely undermined, and I am among many tens of millions of people who are utterly convinced that this has been going on, as Steve pointed out, for a long time, and that everybody is all in now. This is a fight for the life of this country. The Supreme Court, to me, seems to be the only case where this would get a fair hearing, simply because we are now dealing with something that is above the mechanism of corruption that's occurred in these battleground states. If that corruption hadn't been there, we wouldn't have this issue. And just to close with something, for those of you who may be skeptical about this, it is a little odd, don't you think, that that each one of these states, which is supposed to be completely isolated from the others in terms of their electoral processes, they have their own laws, they have their own counting, and so on. It's a bit odd, isn't it, that 5 states decided to stop counting in the course of the evening, which I don't think has ever happened before, and that all 5 of those states happen to be key battleground states, and that the Biden win that happened overnight when they weren't supposed to be counting happened overnight. That is an enormous, enormous thing that happened, right? I don't think there's any question that happened. 5 entire states stopped counting election results at one point or another during the night of the election. That actually happened. Not making that up. That alone is the greatest single evidence that there's something really, really fishy here. And we are now in the situation, just to wrap this up, that looks something like this. We have got a very serious infection in this country, and we are either going to be able to save the legs or not save them. We're going to find out. But this is our last chance for antibiotics to save and push back this gangrene, because if it turns out they get away with this, then there's no other choice but amputation. We cannot continue to abide by people who continually flaunt their criminal activities. And I say that with a great deal of reflection and consideration, because that's a large charge to make. We'll find out soon enough. I'm Bill Whittle here with Steve Green and Scott Ott. We'll see you next week on Right Angle. By this point next week, the electors will presumably have sat. We might have some answers to these questions and then some idea of where we're going to go after that. So we'll see you next week right here on Right Angle.